Between Stars, a Lights of the Collapse bonus story by Millie Copper.
David caught the movement on the street before he fully processed what he was seeing. Linda, wounded but alive, supported between strangers. His eyes quickly noted their positions and the way the man at the rear kept watching the street around them. Relief surged through him as he rushed outside, his hand instinctively checking the holster at his hip before he pushed through the door. "Linda?" The emotion in his voice betrayed the calm he'd maintained up to that point. He sprinted toward them, instinctively scanning his wife for the extent of her injuries, even as relief threatened to overwhelm him. Linda lifted her head at his voice and reached out with her uninjured arm. "David," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. He enveloped her in a careful yet desperate embrace, one hand automatically supporting her wounded arm in a more stable position. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I couldn't find you. I was so scared." He kissed her forehead repeatedly, holding her as if afraid to let go. Linda clung to him, her fingers digging into his shirt. "I'm here," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I'm here, David." He finally pulled back, his eyes assessing the makeshift bandage. "We need to get you inside. I'll take care of you." "She needs to go to the hospital," the woman insisted. "I did what I could to stop the bleeding, but she needs proper treatment. I don't know the severity of her injuries." The couple exchanged a glance before David said, "We have a friend who's a doctor. He'll help us." "You have a doctor?" He gave a nod as Linda said, "Please keep quiet about it, but I'm sure if you needed help he'd be willing. He's not just a friend, he's my brother. Come to my house and we'll help you if we're able." Linda leaned on David as they made their way to the house. She glanced back, gratitude shining through her pain. "Thank you," she whispered. As they reached the porch steps, David paused, giving Linda a moment to catch her breath while his eyes made one final sweep of the street. The strangers were already moving away, and he noticed how the man at the rear maintained awareness of their surroundings, a trait David recognized and respected. He committed their faces to memory, categorizing them mentally as potential allies. In this new world, reliable people were as valuable as ammunition. "Easy now," he murmured, helping Linda up the steps and through the front door. Once inside, he secured the locks and guided her to the living room couch. He knelt beside her and examined the makeshift bandage with a calm focus that belied his inner turmoil. "I'm so sorry," he said, dropping the composed facade now that they were alone. "I was looking everywhere for you." Linda closed her eyes, her face tight with pain. "It all happened so fast. One second we were together waiting for the line to start moving, and then that singing started." Her voice trembled. "I heard you say, 'We've got to get out of here,' and you grabbed my hand. But then the guard, he just started firing into the crowd. I'm so sorry." David took her hand, his grip steady despite the rage building inside him at the memory of the singing guard and how he'd left Linda behind. He knew better than that. "I got separated from you in the panic," Linda continued, wincing as she shifted on the couch. "People were running, screaming. I felt something hit my arm. I thought someone had pushed me, but then I saw the blood." David swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. "I shouldn't have let go of your hand." He gave her a gentle squeeze. "When everyone started running, I lost my grip. I kept calling for you, kept searching. I couldn't find you anywhere. It wasn't your fault, honey. It was crazy." He carefully examined the bandage, assessing the blood pattern. It had obviously been bleeding heavily. He wasn't even sure if he should unwrap it, not without knowing exactly what to do. "We need to clean this properly, and call Woody." "Woody," Linda murmured, referring to her brother. "Yes, he'll know what to do." The woman said, "The bullet didn't hit the bone, said it was a clean through and through, but man does it hurt, like you wouldn't believe." "I can imagine." David's jaw tightened as he stared at his injured wife and thought about what had happened. The Starbrights had turned their world upside down. It had started with scattered reports, people turning violent and then claiming no memory of their actions. The pattern emerged slowly, with singing or humming, always songs about stars, preceding the violence. "It's getting worse," Linda said quietly, reading his expression. "Today, that guard, I never thought they'd reach the distribution centers. It was supposed to be safe." Nothing feels safe anymore, and since no one seems to know what causes the condition, he shook his head as his voice faded away. Early in the disaster, when no one really knew what was going on, each day brought fresh horrors in the news. A stabbing on a packed subway, a car deliberately mowing down pedestrians, mass shootings in places once considered safe. Then came the teenage girl who somehow stole a plane on the West Coast and crashed it into a building. That case lingered with David more than the rest. Working at the airport outside Casper, he couldn't help but imagine such a scenario unfolding under his watch. The revelation that she had been there for a take-your-child-to-work day made it all the more unbearable. Would he have recognized the threat for what it was if it happened in Casper? Could he have stopped it in time? He wasn't sure he could have. Who would suspect a young girl, a teenager, of something like that? "Remember when we thought it wouldn't reach Wyoming?" Linda asked, her voice hollow. "How it was just weird things happening in other places?" The day the girl stole the airplane, killing 6, was when everything began to change. Casper was rocked by a series of coordinated explosions across the small city and throughout Wyoming. But it wasn't just Wyoming. That day marked the tipping point when the humming and singing shifted from unsettling news stories to a global nightmare. A nightmare that now dictated their every move. "The governor tried," David said, rising to retrieve the first aid kit from the bathroom. "At first, anyway." Their lives had changed dramatically in the 3 weeks since the mass attacks. A state of emergency had been declared for the hardest-hit Wyoming counties. The CDC announcements came first, then the president's address as government facilities closed across the country, including all airports, government buildings, Devil's Tower, and Yellowstone National Park. "At least we were luckier than most states," Linda said as David returned with supplies. "Remember how the governor refused to go to extremes, as he put it?" "Oof. That didn't last long." David frowned, recalling how both he and Linda were immediately out of jobs. But the gas stations and grocery stores stayed open, for a while anyway, but just like before he became heavy-handed. His wife sighed. "I guess you were right about him." It was no secret that David didn't think much of their governor and was glad his term was nearly over. With the limits in place, he couldn't run again, though everyone knew he had his sights set on a higher office. Now, who knew what would happen? With the way things were going, David wasn't even sure there would be elections. He hoped things would return to normal soon, but each day seemed to bring more lawlessness. He wondered if the governor was even still at his post. What about the president? They hadn't heard from either in days, at least not that David knew of. Without a television, they relied on streaming for news, but the internet was becoming increasingly unreliable. They had been grateful to live in Wyoming, where the changes weren't as immediate or drastic as reports they'd heard from other states. But their sense of security shattered when the Star Brights hit the Albertsons grocery store, barely a mile from their home. He and Linda had watched the viral videos in horror as Star Brights sang in unison while setting the store ablaze. It was one of the first signs of an organized group acting together. Since then, more had surfaced. Someone would start singing or humming, and then another would join, and another. A grainy video taken from a distance showed a single Star Bright attacking someone. As the fight dragged on, the noise drew another of the afflicted. At first, the newcomers seemed to want to help, stepping in to aid the victim. Then their expression went vacant, and they began singing about stars. It had not ended well for the innocent. "Think anyone recorded the event today?" David asked, remembering how the incident at the grocery store had been broadcast on Chum Fun. It made little sense why people would take the time to video when they should have been running to safety. "Wouldn't surprise me," Linda winced as he touched a sensitive spot near her wound. "Human nature, I guess, even when it's self-destructive." After the grocery store attack, everything changed. The governor enacted what amounted to martial law, with the strictest restrictions falling on Casper and other hard-hit areas. Grocery stores closed completely. Gas stations became accessible only on assigned days, until eventually fuel was cut off entirely. "We never should have gone to the distribution center today," David said, guilt lacing his voice as he carefully looked over Linda's arm. He was certified as a Wyoming emergency medical responder. As an EMR, he knew enough to provide immediate life-saving care and to perform basic interventions while waiting for EMS to arrive. The woman who helped had done well as far as he could tell. If she was right about the bullet missing the bone, then Linda would make a full recovery. David knew not to risk disturbing the wound and causing it to bleed again. Linda was pale and shaky. She needed to lie down. "Here," he said, "let's get you comfortable." He helped position her on the couch and covered her with a blanket and then sat at her side, taking her pulse and watching her breathing. Both were within normal range. He searched her face. Was she shocky? Maybe a little. "Don't feel guilty," Linda said, meeting his gaze. "This is not your fault. We needed the food. We had no choice but to go to the DC today. I just wish we could have at least gotten our rations before the shooting started." She offered a weak smile. Kelly Walsh High School had become their designated location, close enough to walk to. That's where they'd gone when everything fell apart, where a guard had started singing that haunting melody before opening fire into the crowd. "We'll find another way," he promised, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Trade with neighbors, maybe. Send out hunting parties. I was thinking maybe we could figure out some live traps for cottontails and maybe even the wild turkeys. Set things up so we have a protein source. There has to be a solution that doesn't involve putting ourselves at risk like that again." He reached for the phone to call Woody, praying the lines were still working. "I'm not losing you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not to the Star Brights, not to anything." He only wished the guilt of failing her earlier would fade. He never should have let go of her, not under any circumstance. Linda reached out with her uninjured arm to touch his face. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "We'll figure this out." He turned his head slightly and kissed her fingers. "We will, I promise you, we will." He dialed Woody, waiting for the phone to ring. Only silence greeted him. He tried again with the same result. "It's out again?" "Seems so. The phone and internet had been unreliable since the day of the explosions. Even the lights would sometimes go out. Maybe it's okay?" She motioned toward her injured arm. "You can just unwrap it and clean it?" "I don't know, maybe—" He squatted next to her, trying to formulate a plan. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When that guard started shooting, all I could think about was you, getting back to you. I didn't know if you were hurt or—" David stroked her cheek. "I'm here. We're both here. That's what matters now." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their near miss settling over them. In the distance a siren sounded, followed by a gunshot, not close, yet still too close. This wasn't the Casper they knew and loved. "Those people who helped me," Linda said after a while. "They didn't have to. They risked their lives. I owe them everything. Did you get their names?" Linda started to shake her head, then winced. "The woman who bandaged my arm, I think her name was Heather. There were 2 kids with her, a teenage girl and a boy a little younger. Their names are Maddie and Jackson. The man is Elliot." "I don't think they were all together." "What do you mean?" "Well, those were the woman's children, that I'm sure of, but the man wasn't her spouse. They knew each other, I think, but not well." David nodded, committing the names to memory. In this new world, debts and alliances might mean the difference between survival and becoming another statistic. "I came back here. I thought maybe somehow you'd made it home. I was about to head out again to look for you. I wasn't going unarmed this time." He eyed the gun cabinet across the room, its door still ajar from his rushed search earlier, which was interrupted when he'd glanced out the window and saw Linda and the others approaching. "I knew we should have ignored the rules about not taking guns to the distribution center." He laughed bitterly. Linda followed his gaze to the cabinet. "But they were searching everyone before they could go in. You know that." "I don't care. I'm not going anywhere unarmed. Neither are you. Right now I'm going to get Woody." "You don't need to go get him. Just wait until the phone works. I'm sure it'll be fine." "Can't risk it. There's quite a bit of blood on the bandage, and I'm afraid if I unwrap it we'll have a mess. But I'm sure it needs to be properly cleaned." "Will you take the car?" David scrubbed his face with his hands. They'd parked the cars when the fuel rations were stopped, planning to preserve what they had in case they needed it. "I don't think so. Think it's best if I walk. the car could attract unwanted attention. They had heard the stories of people being attacked while driving, not just by Starbrights, but by ordinary people desperate for a car or whatever might be inside. The same was happening to houses, with break-ins becoming more common. Some neighborhoods had started working together, blocking off streets and setting up patrols for protection. Woody had considered doing something similar in his neighborhood and had even invited David and Linda to move in. David thought it was a good idea. Woody's cul-de-sac offered better protection than the open street where he and Linda lived, but once Linda made up her mind, she was set. Convincing her to leave was nearly impossible. He had hoped to form an alliance with the neighbors on either side, but both houses were empty. No one answered when he knocked, and neither family had been seen in over a week. With the city locked down and no one allowed in or out of Casper, he could only assume they had found somewhere else within town to ride this out. Maybe a place like what Woody was offering. David knew that moving there was the safest option, but staying would let Linda keep her independence, something she valued above all else, a result of her years of being single and marrying later in life. He was torn between the choice that made the most sense and the one that respected her wishes. "How about a glass of water?" he offered. "Yes, please. Be right back." As he returned to the living room, he noticed Linda's eyes were closed, her face pale. Fear gripped him again. "Linda, you okay?" Her eyes fluttered open. "Just tired," she murmured, "and my arm hurts. I brought some pain relievers, just the over-the-counter kind, but maybe they'll help until Woody gets here. I'll make sure he brings something stronger." Linda nodded. He helped her adjust to a more comfortable position and then handed her the water. She took a sip, swallowed the pills, and followed with another drink. "If you insist on going, do it and hurry back. I don't want you out after dark," she said. David hesitated. The thought of leaving Linda alone, even for the short walk to Woody's house, made his stomach knot. "I don't want to leave you. It only lives a couple of blocks away. I'll be fine. I'll keep the doors locked. Maybe nap while you're gone. But you should hurry. I'll worry about you while you're gone." His heart did a crazy little flutter, knowing he'd be worried about her too. She may be fiercely independent, but their relationship was strong and good for both of them. He also knew Woody's medical expertise was essential, and the sooner he arrived, the better. David went to the gun cabinet and pocketed a spare magazine. He grabbed a revolver, one Linda had used plenty for target practice. After confirming it was loaded, he set it on the end table beside the couch. She smiled and nodded. "Hopefully it'll still be sitting right there when you get back." "I'm sure everything will be fine," he promised, though the butterflies in his stomach begged to differ. "I'll be back as quickly as I can." He leaned down to kiss her. "Keep the door locked. Don't answer it for anyone. I have my own key, but I'll make sure you know it's me before I come in." "I know the drill," she said, attempting a smile. "Be careful, David. Please." "Always." He squeezed her hand one more time before heading to the door. With a final glance back at his wife, he stepped into the afternoon sun. The street was unnervingly quiet. The sirens and gunfire had stopped, leaving an unsettling stillness. Most houses were sealed tight, curtains drawn, doors closed. Whether the occupants were hiding from the outside world or had moved on, no one knew. Either way, it was a far cry from the neighborhood block parties and children playing in the yards that had been so common just weeks ago. David hurried down the sidewalk, every sense alert. The familiar phrases from action movies, army operators, and fellow law enforcement officers echoed in his mind. "Check your six, watch your flank, head on a swivel, stay frosty." Each one was a reminder to stay alert, to never let his guard down. His military service might have been behind a desk, but he'd absorbed the tactical principles that were now proving essential for survival in this new world. Years working at airports had reinforced those lessons. The chaos from the distribution center seemed to have settled, but that didn't mean safety. David had seen enough crises in his career to know that sometimes the quiet aftermath was more dangerous than the noise. People lowered their guard while threats still lingered. Woody's house sat at the end of a block, at the turnaround of a cul-de-sac. It was a modest two-story with a daylight basement and detached garage he had converted into a makeshift clinic. For now, he reserved it for his closest neighbors and family, but David knew Woody planned to help as many people as he could. The day of the explosions had started like any other at Woody's private practice. When news of the catastrophe broke, he and his nursing staff rushed to the main hospital to assist. The following days had been brutal, with more injured than the facility and staff could handle. A second hospital, typically used for day surgeries, took in the less critical cases, but even then the death toll had been high. With similar disasters unfolding across the state and beyond, they had no way to transfer patients who needed higher-level trauma care, something that had bothered Woody immensely. The main hospital was barely hanging on, with the day surgery location now shut down after having been vandalized a few days following the explosions. Most of the staff had stopped going in. According to Woody, many were setting up local care just as he was. The National Guard had taken control of the hospital, just as they had the airport and other critical infrastructure. The doctors and nurses still working were living on site. Most were single and doing what they could, while a few had moved their families in as well. Woody had shut down his private practice, transferring everything he could to his house. On his last trip to the office, with David tagging along to help, they found it had been broken into. They salvaged what they could, but much of it had been destroyed. Woody suspected it was done out of spite. He had already moved anything useful, including the drug samples. Not that he had ever stocked anything highly valuable in terms of narcotics, but somehow he had still managed to amass an impressive supply of pharmaceuticals. David wasn't sure how, and he didn't ask. As David entered the cul-de-sac, the hair on the back of his neck prickled. A sense of being watched washed over him. He glanced at the house on the right, but saw nothing. The same with the house across the street. Both had their blinds pulled and appeared empty, much like every other place, but somehow he knew that was only an illusion. He straightened his shoulders and picked up his pace. As he neared Woody's place, he noticed the curtains twitch. Someone was watching. He raised his hand in a gesture of peace as he walked up the porch steps. Before he could knock, the door opened slightly, the barrel of a shotgun visible in the gap. "David?" Woody peered over his shoulder. "Where's Linda?" "It's just me," David said, forcing himself to sound calm, hands still raised. "She's hurt." The door opened wider, revealing Dr. Woody Gillis. Late 40s, with the same dark hair as his sister, though his was now streaked with gray. The shotgun lowered but didn't disappear. "What happened?" Woody asked, his doctor eyes already assessing David for signs of injury. "Attack at the food distribution," David rushed out, his voice tight. "Linda got hit, shot in the arm. Someone helped her and wrapped it up, but I don't know how bad it is." His words tumbled out faster. "She lost a lot of blood. She's weak. But she's alert, coherent? She was when I left. She's alone?" Woody's eyes widened as he shook his head. David showed his palms. "What could I do?" "Woody?" A voice called from the end of the hallway. It was Woody's wife, Reba. "It's me, David," he called. "I need... Linda's hurt." Reba stepped into view. "How bad?" David shrugged. "Bad enough. Gunshot to the arm." Reba's mouth went into a tight line as she nodded. "Will you need me, Woody?" Woody turned to her, medical bag already in hand. "Probably not. David'll help me." He met David's gaze. "Absolutely. It's bandaged now. I didn't want to unwrap it in case it started bleeding." "Bandage or tourniquet?" Woody asked. "Not tight enough for a tourniquet. A man's t-shirt." "Anyone else hurt?" Reba asked, now joining them in the entryway. "Not with us. But there were casualties, lots of them." David's voice hardened as he recalled the disaster from earlier, thinking about the guard who started singing and then emptying his weapon. They were all like sitting ducks, unarmed and funneled into the ball field with no way out. Panic spread like wildfire, but it was too late. There was nothing but the sound of the gunfire, the screams and the deafening silence that followed. Another Starbright incident, a guard this time. Woody's shoulders tensed. "I wish they could figure out exactly what's causing it. Nothing really makes sense, and now the CDC isn't releasing any reports. I had a friend..." He sighed as he continued gathering supplies. "Never mind." He grabbed a second, smaller case that David knew contained surgical instruments and tucked it in the larger bag. He turned to Reba. "I'll be back soon. I guess this is meant to be." She glanced at David. Woody planned on going to your place tonight to convince you to move here. Join forces with us. We have plenty of room, even after the kids get home. It would make sense for us to all be together, even if Linda isn't crazy about the idea. Reba and Woody's sons were overseas when the attacks started, walking a popular pilgrimage route that led from France to the tomb of St. James in Spain. When plane travel stopped, they found a small village to stay in. They hadn't heard from the boys in over 2 weeks, but Reba didn't give up hope they'd find a way home. How, David had no idea, considering an ocean separated them. In the early days of commercial flights being grounded, they had considered David a pilot renting a plane to go after them, but that too proved to be an impossible option. "It's true," Woody said, clapping David's shoulder. "We want you with us. Need you here. We're forming an alliance with the neighbors. Everyone on this cul-de-sac to start with. People I know, people I trust. The garage clinic is already established and my basement is dry and secure for storage, plus we have the guest room down there. That'll give you and Linda some privacy. Everyone contributes what they can, food, skills, manpower for security. And what happens when someone decides they deserve more than others, or brings in people we don't know?" David had seen enough of human nature in crisis to be wary. "We establish rules, clear guidelines everyone agrees to." Woody tightened his grip on David's shoulder. "We'd be safer together, stronger together." "Maybe," David agreed, though he knew Linda would argue. "We'd need to bring the car, pack it with all we could. Besides, I'm not sure if Linda could walk." "If we do that," Woody said, "we'll want to wait until after dark, drive without lights, and hope to not draw any attention. We haven't had trouble with Starbrights here." Reba was shaking her head. "Not in our neighborhood." Woody shrugged. "Things can change in an instant. We all know that." He reached for Reba's hand. "Don't worry if I'm not back right away. We'll be smart and stay safe." "Your dad?" "Sleeping. We'll be fine." She rose on her toes to deliver a kiss. "See you soon." "See you soon," Woody repeated before turning to David. "Let's go." They stepped onto the porch, the sound of locks engaging behind them. Both men scanned the street. "How's her dad doing?" David asked in a low voice. "Not well. Without the chemo." His voice faded away. "Ready?" "Let's do it." David nodded as they stepped off the porch. They walked quickly but quietly, both men constantly watching the empty street around them. The late June sun blazed overhead, making David's shirt stick to his back. As they neared the end of the cul-de-sac, the sensation of being watched crept over David again. He considered mentioning it to Woody, but talking wasn't worth the risk these days when silence might keep you alive. As they left the dead-end street and turned left toward David's house, he felt a slight sense of relief. Well, not exactly relief, but at least he no longer felt eyes on him. They'd made it about 50 yards when they heard it. Soft at first, almost below the threshold of hearing. A humming, a melody that made David tense, his hand automatically moving toward his weapon. "Where?" Woody whispered, his fingers reaching for the holster at his side. David shook his head slightly, trying to locate the source of the sound. The humming grew clearer, resolving into a tune that had become the harbinger of violence across the country. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The singing voice came from between 2 houses across the street. A figure emerged, hands up as if praising in church, a calm smile on his face, a man maybe in his early 30s, dressed casually. His eyes were vacant, fixed on some point above their heads, but his body moved with terrible purpose. "How I wonder what you are." David pulled his brother-in-law down behind a parked car. But it was too late. The Starbright had spotted them, and his gentle singing transformed instantly into a loud, bellowing call that echoed through the empty streets. The sound carried far beyond where they stood, a summons that could potentially draw any other Starbright within hearing distance. As he charged across the street, David quickly assessed the situation, immediate threat first, worry about reinforcements second. David drew his gun with practiced ease but paused. This was still a civilian, someone's loved one who had succumbed to whatever this was. The hesitation cost him. The Starbright was on them before he could fire. "Run!" Woody called, fumbling with his own handgun as he popped to his feet. The man crashed into Woody and sent them both tumbling to the pavement. The medical bag spilled open and scattered precious supplies across the ground. Woody grappled with his attacker, struggling to keep the man at bay. David holstered his gun. It was too dangerous to fire with Woody so close, and instead grabbed a handful of bark dust from the nearby yard. "Woody, protect your eyes!" He lunged forward and threw the coarse material directly into the Starbright's eyes. The man cried out, momentarily releasing Woody as he clawed at his face. Grabbing onto Woody's shoulders, David pulled him away from the blinded attacker. As Woody got to his feet, so did the other man, no longer singing but humming the familiar tune, his hands wiping frantically at his eyes. The attacker lunged forward on instinct. David sidestepped and drew his gun again, establishing distance. He didn't want to shoot. Ammunition was precious, and gunfire might attract more of them. Before he could decide, David saw Woody grab a decorative landscaping stone from the edge of the yard. Woody surged forward, bringing the heavy rock down on the Starbright's head with a sickening thud. The man dropped, his song cutting off mid-lyric. Both men stood breathing hard, staring at the fallen figure, David already looking around for additional threats. He decided if another Starbright appeared, he wouldn't hesitate to shoot. Woody knelt cautiously, pressing his fingers to the man's neck. "Still alive," he confirmed, "but out cold." "We need to contain this," David said. What was the protocol here? There wasn't one. No one knew what to do with the Starbrights. Some communities were isolating them, while others took more permanent measures. Woody made the decision for them. "We leave him. Get to Linda." He began quickly gathering his scattered medical supplies. He'll either wake up and wander off, maybe even come out of his trance, or... David understood the unspoken truth. Without proper containment facilities, there were limited options for handling these threats. He also knew that many of those incarcerated in the early days, exhibiting Starbright behavior, had no recollection of what they'd done. As he helped Woody collect the medical supplies, David kept an eye on the fallen man. He no longer looked menacing, simply unconscious. David's finger tapped against his holstered weapon as he weighed his responsibility. It would be easier to neutralize the threat permanently if the man didn't suddenly seem so human. He understood Woody's reluctance as a physician, but David's job had always been about public safety. His jaw clenched as he considered the implications of leaving a potential threat. The Starbrights were effectively compromising national security. He'd sworn to protect the public. "Let's go," Woody whispered once they had picked up everything salvageable. "Are you sure we should just leave him here?" David asked, uneasy with the incomplete resolution. Woody tugged on David's arm. "We need to get to Linda." David looked between the unconscious man and the direction of home, weighing duty against necessity. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded grimly. "You're right. She needs us." He cast one last troubled glance at the fallen Starbright before following Woody, breaking into a jog as they left the scene, his professional judgment unsatisfied with the compromise. They had made it about half a block when a gunshot rang out. Both men flinched and ducked slightly, their jog turning into a run. A second shot followed, then a voice called out, "Double tap. That's the ticket." Someone had made the choice David hadn't been able to make. Relief and guilt collided within him as the echo of the gunshots faded. The threat was eliminated by another's hand, by someone who hadn't hesitated when faced with the necessary decision. David wondered what that said about him. They didn't stop running until they reached David's house. As they turned up the walk, both men slowed, their out-of-shape bodies struggling to catch their breath. David knew he needed to work on his cardio if this was how the world was going to be. The days of desk jobs and weekend golf games seemed like another lifetime, a luxury they could no longer afford in a world where running could mean the difference between life and death. As they approached the house, David scanned the street. "We should assume there are more," he said quietly. "Plan accordingly." Woody nodded, his face tight as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Next time we finish it, it's hard, as a doctor. But I'll do it for Reba. For Linda. For my boys when they make it home." David's hand rested on his holster. "That's what survival looks like now, Woody." They reached the front door, and David knocked in the pattern he and Linda had established. 3 quick raps, pause, 2 more, before putting his key in the lock. Before opening the door, he stage whispered, "Linda, it's me. I'm back with Woody." "Wait," she called. I put a chair in front of the door." It was a moment of silence, then the sound of scraping. The door opened to reveal Linda, still pale but standing on her own, her revolver held against her thigh, ready in case she needed it. "Thank goodness," she breathed, eyes moving from David to Woody. "I was worried." "We ran into trouble," David explained as they entered, quickly securing the door behind them. "A Starbright. We're okay." Linda's eyes widened as she noticed the state of Woody's medical bag and the fresh scrape on David's arm where he had fallen during the struggle. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for him. "It's nothing," David assured her, guiding her back to the couch. "Let Woody look at your arm. That's the priority." Woody had already begun unpacking his supplies on the coffee table. "Sit down, Linda," he instructed, his voice shifting into professional mode. "Let me see what we're dealing with." Linda complied, wincing as Woody carefully removed the T-shirt the woman, Heather, had applied. "How bad is it?" she asked, looking away from the wound. Woody examined it closely, cleaning it with an antiseptic solution that made Linda hiss in pain. "Deep but clean. You're lucky," he said after a moment. "Nothing major hit, no bones or artery, and the edges are straight." He glanced up at her. "It'll need stitches, though, and it's going to leave a scar." "Scars are the new normal," Linda said, attempting a smile that fell flat. "Can you grab me a chair from the dining room?" Woody motioned to David. As Woody got himself situated and prepared to suture the wound, David noticed a fresh blood stain on his brother-in-law's sleeve. "Woody, you're bleeding too." Woody glanced at his arm dismissively. "Just a scratch from our friend out there. I'll deal with it after Linda's taken care of." As Woody set up things for suturing, Linda watched both men, her face pale but composed. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "With the Starbright?" David and Woody exchanged a glance. "Nothing we couldn't handle," David said eventually, not wanting to worry her with the details, and still wishing he would have made a different decision instead of leaving it to someone else to handle. "But it was close, too close." "I'm going to numb it," Woody said. "It'll take most of the sting away, but you'll feel a few tugs." She took in a sharp breath as he gave her the shot. "Sorry," Woody murmured. "I know that stings. It'll take a couple of minutes for it to take effect." "Do they know what's causing it yet?" Linda asked her brother. "Have you heard anything they're not telling us ordinary folk?" "I'm pretty much an ordinary folk now, too, you know. I've barely left my house in a week." "But you still have friends." "Who don't seem to know anything more than I do." Woody scrunched his face as he shook his head. "The last guy I talked to was someone I knew from med school. He's doing research now. He's not officially working on this, but he has a theory, a crazy and unlikely theory." "This entire thing is crazy," Linda said. "I can't imagine his ideas are any more outlandish than others. I don't understand how a virus or bacteria could cause this. It's almost like those zombie movies, you know? Starbrights aren't zombies. They're not the undead. They are normal humans who—" "I know that," Linda snapped. "I'm just making a point." Woody met her gaze and then tapped a spot on her arm. "Feel that?" "Not really." "Okay, we'll get this done." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by Linda's occasional sharp intake of breath as Woody sutured her wound. Finally, Linda said, "I just wish we knew why it was happening. Then maybe they could stop it. Things could return to normal. They used to talk about a vaccine." Woody snorted. "Not happening. They don't magically have something in the works for this." "You're sure?" David asked. "Positive." "There," Woody said, tying off the last stitch. "Looks pretty good if I do say so myself. You'll need to keep it clean and dry. I want to give you a course of antibiotics, too." The rag the woman used up against your skin was none too clean. The T-shirt wasn't much better. She did the best she could. We were hiding in some kind of utility shed. "I'm sure she did. Stopping the bleeding was important. You still probably lost more blood than you should have. We'll make sure you get plenty of fluids and rest over the next couple of days." Linda glanced from Woody to David. He shrugged. He should have already told her about moving to Woody's place, but they had discussed it before when he was setting up the med center in the garage and had moved his father-in-law in with them, and she hadn't wanted to. Even though she and Reba got along most of the time, they occasionally butted heads, as can happen with family. David understood some of the reasons, but not all of them. Reba had built her life around her family and being a doctor's wife, while Linda had been single with no kids until she met David 5 years ago, thanks to Woody introducing them. Buying a house near Woody and Reba had been David's idea. Linda agreed, but he knew she didn't always love living so close to her brother and sister-in-law. She did, however, love being near her nephews, and worried about the twins being stuck in France almost as much as their parents did. David cleared his throat. You know how we were discussing banding together with the neighbors? Woody and Reba have already started. No. It'll help all of us. Linda shook her head and looked at her brother. You know I love you, Reba too. I just don't know if I can live with either of you. She paused and met David's gaze. Besides, we're fine here. Are we, Linda? David asked, tamping down his irritation. You could have died today. We can't risk trying to get by on our own any longer. David's right, Woody said as he wrapped a clean bandage around Linda's bicep. And he doesn't even know most of the measures we've taken. Fact is, if he'd have shown up tomorrow instead of today, he wouldn't have made it to my front door. Meaning? David asked. Meaning we'll have guards posted. No one will enter the cul-de-sac without a reason and approval. Some of the plans are still being worked out, especially how we can ensure none of us suddenly start humming and looking all vacant-eyed, but for the most part we're locking things down. What about your plans for a med center? That'll still happen, just done with an abundance of caution. My neighbor at the end of the block is the one spearheading things. You've met him before. The one with the Marine son? The same. His son is with him. He's in charge of security. They're probably the ones who took care of the Starbright earlier. How do you know? I saw them. I didn't want to say anything, but I caught them out of the corner of my eye while we were running away. Probably heard the ruckus and went to investigate. He leaned back slightly. Flex your fingers. He showed Linda what he wanted her to do. Why not until tomorrow? Linda asked, doing as requested. Getting our ducks in a row, bringing in a few more families. I was planning to come over here tonight to drag you to my house, kicking and screaming if need be. He smiled at his baby sister. We can't just leave our home. You'll bring what you need today. We can make a few trips back and forth. David moved to the couch to sit next to his wife. I think we should do it. Anything to keep you safe. How do we know this is the right choice? Woody leaned back in his chair. I think we're going to discover as this plays out that small enclaves like what we're doing will become the norm. It's how we're going to learn to survive. I suppose, Linda muttered. Woody turned his attention to David. Now, let me see that arm of yours. David extended his arm, allowing Woody to examine the scrape. It wasn't deep, just painful and dirty from his fall on the pavement. Woody cleaned it thoroughly, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped it in a light bandage. It should heal fine, he said, securing the bandage. But keep it clean. Infections are dangerous now. As if they needed the reminder. With hospitals overwhelmed and medical supplies dwindling, even minor injuries could become life-threatening. How about yours? David asked, motioning to Woody's injury. Yep. Mind if I use your bathroom? The mirror will help me. I can take a look, Linda said, sounding tired. No need, I'll clean it up and be right back out. He shot David a pointed look, one David understood immediately. Convincing Linda to move to Woody's neighborhood was necessary. They would be safer there. Not entirely safe, but safer. Food would still be a concern, but one advantage was the way Woody's property backed up to a greenway with a walking path. That green space was one of the places they often saw turkeys. Maybe his plan to capture a few and raise them could actually work. They needed to do something. If they couldn't get to the drops, they would run out of food. He had spent too many nights lying awake calculating and recalculating their supplies, searching for a way to stretch them until things got back under control. He hated to admit they had been low on groceries when everything started. Both he and Linda worked long hours and often grabbed takeout for dinner or ate at restaurants on weekends. Neither was an option now. We have to do it, Linda, he said softly. Reba will drive me crazy. I'll drive her crazy." He held his tongue, waiting for his wife to see the ridiculousness of what she was saying. It took only a few seconds before she sighed. "We don't have a choice." "No, we don't. We'll take the car. There's still enough fuel for a few trips, but we'll load as much in as we can today. We don't have much to offer this alliance Woody's putting together, but we'll do what we can. You have lots to offer, your time in the army." I pushed papers. "Still, you know things. You have your medical responder and firefighter training. Your security training." He didn't want to admit what had happened earlier. Even with training, he had frozen. He hadn't done what was necessary to stop the Starbright from being a future threat. "I have them and keep them up, but how often do I use them? You know the friend Woody is talking about? The one at the end of the cul-de-sac?" She scrunched up her face. "Maybe? I'm not certain. He's the one that referred to me as the airport janitor." "Janitor, Linda." She smiled. "He'd had too much to drink. Plus, he didn't fully understand your duties. I don't even know how he got janitor out of your job title." David shrugged. "I don't understand it either. Operations and public safety manager is nothing like being a janitor. Sure, I've cleaned my share of toilets over the years, but that's hardly my main responsibility." He frowned, remembering the interaction. When I explained I was essentially airport police, he wasn't any more impressed. He just assumed I was TSA and dismissed me altogether. You know how people like him think. If you're not carrying a gun and a badge with the right agency name, you might as well be directing traffic. She shrugged. "I try not to give people like him space in my brain. You shouldn't either. You've done an amazing job keeping us safe so far, and I know it's been selfish of me not to have already agreed to move to Woody's place. You barely sleep as it is, and I know that's only going to get worse as things continue to crumble. Besides, Woody understands. He knows our strengths and our weaknesses. You're his sister, and you're his best friend." David sighed. Alone, he and Linda were vulnerable, as today had proven, but trusting others in this new world was risky. He and Woody had been friends since college days. In fact, Woody was the reason David had moved to Casper in the first place. When the airport position opened up, David had jumped at the chance to live in the same town where Woody had grown up and return to open his practice. The bonus to that was meeting Linda, the love of his life, who just happened to be Woody's younger sister. Would the others in the neighborhood be as welcoming? The guy on the end was a loudmouth know-it-all who seemed to measure men by their military credentials and job titles. At their first meeting, he had practically sneered when David mentioned the airport. The man had backed off only slightly when Woody jumped in, explaining they'd met in college after David had served 4 years in the Army, and that being in charge of airport security was nothing like TSA. The implication in Woody's tone had been clear. David could handle himself if needed, but if not, Woody had his back. It hadn't escaped David's notice that Woody conveniently omitted that David's time in the Army had been spent as a supply specialist, not in combat. Linda was right. Let the man think what he wanted. In this new world, sometimes a reputation was as valuable as ammunition. "It's our only option, isn't it?" Linda said softly. "I think so. You know I love Reba, it's just—" She glanced at the bathroom door, seeming to understand now was the time to make the decision, and there was only one decision to be made. "But it's a big step, giving up our home, our independence." "It's not giving up," David assured her. "It's joining forces. I'm sure Woody has thought this through. They've got Reba's dad with them. He's in the family room, for now. The basement is empty. We could stay down there and have our privacy. We'll work hard with the others, share resources, security duties, and skills." "Like a commune?" Linda raised an eyebrow. David chuckled. "Can you imagine either Woody or Reba in a commune? My guess is it'll be more like a very small, very exclusive neighborhood association with survival benefits." Her shoulders dropped as she nodded her head. "Okay, you're right. It's the right choice. The only choice." David squeezed her hand and stood. The decision was made. Challenges lay ahead, adjusting to living with family, proving their place in this new alliance, and facing the constant threat of the Starbrights. But staying alone was no longer an option. He had already failed her earlier when they were separated, and it had nearly cost her life. That wasn't going to happen again.
This has been Between Stars, a Lights of the Collapse bonus story by Millie Copper. The series continues with The Greater Light, Lights of the Collapse, Book 2. Learn more about Millie Copper's books at milliecopper.com.